Now we will have opening words. They are from the American poet, wonderful writer, Gary Snyder. And they're from his book of interviews called The Real Work. One of the key problems in American society now, it seems to me, is people's lack of commitment to any given place. Neighborhoods are allowed to deteriorate. Landscapes are allowed to be strip mined because there is nobody who will live there and take responsibility. They'll just move on. The reconstruction of life in the United States depends in part on people, neighborhood by neighborhood, county by county, deciding to stick it out and make it work where they are rather than flee. Some people are beginning to try to understand where they are and what it would mean to live carefully and wisely in a place in such a way that you can live there adequately and comfortably. Also, your children and grandchildren and generations 1,000 years in the future will still be able to live there. That's thinking as though you were a native, thinking in terms of the whole fabric of life. Do you want to come take something out? There's several things in here. All right, you got a good one. Do you want to come take something out? Huh? There are 3 or 4 more things in there. There you go, that's a good one. Do you want one? Okay. I'm going to give this to Mom so she can give it to somebody. All right, now, what do I have here? Feathers, right? Okay, now those, everything we got out of the box has to do with birds. And the reason I brought birds today, 2 reasons. One is I absolutely love birds. And birds are everywhere. And this is a time of year when birds are really busy. They sing a lot, they talk a lot, they fuss a lot, they make nests. Pretty soon they're laying eggs, pretty soon they're hatching chicks, and then they have to rush around and find food to feed the chicks. You ever hear what the chicks do when they're hungry? They chatter and chatter and chatter and squawk and squawk. You might do that sometimes when you're kind of hungry and say, Mom, when is supper? And that's kind of what they're doing. These feathers are from not the kind, I'm going to talk about the other reason, okay, that I brought birds, aside from the fact that I love birds, is for the grown-ups later on, I'm going to read a story. It's a true story that has a bird at the end of it. Not this kind of bird. These feathers come from wild turkeys. And my wife, Ruth, and I, right? Ruth's in the back chairs there, the back row. She and I saw a turkey just down the road from here this morning, a wild turkey. Sometimes there are clumps of them. Well, so that's why I brought those. You have a little one. Now, you have a little bird. It's made like clay. It's made out of clay and baked like pottery. And I washed that bird, and I washed your bird, and I washed your bird this morning. So if you would like to see whether that bird whistles, you can try it out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, yours whistles. No, just put it in your mouth, sweetie. It's clean. Okay. Yeah. Well, one of those, I'm trying to see which one it is. One of those our daughter made in a class taught by the woman who made the other ones. So they whistle. They're all whistles. You want to show people what you have? That's a beautifully wooden bird. That's made out of walnut. And I love walnut because my dad loved walnut. It's a kind of tree. You want to hold yours up? See what it is? It's a painted duck. And I'm going to put my feathers back in. And if you would put yours in this box, and then you may go off to your classes. But thanks for sharing birds with me. And when you go home, actually, while you're here, you keep looking out the windows. There's a lot of busy birds working around here, looking for things to make their nests out of. And when you go home, keep your eye out for birds and your ear open for birds. Well, the reading is from one of my books. I don't know if Marty has it up there, but it's called Staying Put. And this is from the preface, which helps explain my own concerns and why I was and am sympathetic with all searchers, all people, all groups who are looking for an understanding of where they are, what their purposes are, and where they hope to go. So this is from the preface to Staying Put. On coming to a new place, my father would take a pinch of dirt, sprinkle it in his palm, stir it with a finger, squeeze it, then taste it on his tongue. When I first saw him do this, I was puzzled. Why eat dirt? Just trying to figure out where I am, he explained. Writing is my own tasting of the dirt, my effort to find out where I am, to fashion a life that is firmly grounded in household and community, in knowledge of place, in awareness of nature, and in contact with that source from which all things rise. I aspire to become an inhabitant, one who knows and honors the land. Only by understanding where I live can I learn how to live. There's no need to go looking for a home, of course, unless you're lost. I have been lost in ways no map could remedy. I cannot return to my native ground and take up residence there. The farm in Tennessee, where I spent my earliest years, is under asphalt. The military arsenal where I lived next is locked away behind fences and soldiers. And the farm in Ohio, where I spent the rest of my childhood, has been erased entirely. The house and barn bulldozed, the woods and fields flooded by a dam. If I am to have a home, it can only be a place I have come to as an adult, a place where, along with my wife, I have chosen to stay. The place I have chosen is a neighborhood of old houses and young children in a college town blessed with students who arrive here from all over the world. The core of my home ground is the area within walking distance of my front door, a rolling, wooded, potholed terrain known as karst landscape, because it is defined by the erosion of limestone. And that core is encircled by the worn, unglaciated hills of south central Indiana. And these hills, bristling with beech, maple, and oak, these creeks dappled with sycamores, these flowering fields are embraced by the watershed of the Ohio River. This landscape may seem tame. No surf breaks on rocky shores. No mountains gleam with snow. No bears prowl. It is a settled region, marked everywhere by human presence. But for all our buildings and lights and roads, for all our signs and words, that human presence is only a thin film stretched over mystery. Let sunlight flame in a blade of grass. Let night come on. Let thunder roll and tornado whirl. Let the earth quake. Let muscles twitch. Let mind curl around the least pebble or blossom or bird, and the true wildness of this place, of all places, reveals itself.
I was asked to name this reflection before I had written it, so I'm not sure it's completely accurate. We've been talking about place, home, and UUCCI all weekend with Scott. The phrase that rings true to me, even though it sounds a little trite, is home is where the heart is. Although my family was very actively involved in the construction of this building, it is not mainly what I think of when I think of UUCCI. I think of all of you and all that we have done together, learned together, and how we have cared for each other. When I first started coming to what was then the UU Fellowship of Bartholomew County, it was in a little white traditional looking church on 8th Street. It wasn't exactly obscure, but it was definitely fairly anonymous. I didn't know anyone here as we had moved away from our community in Indianapolis to raise our children in the country and found ourselves in Bartholomew County. Fortunately, somehow I met Kathy Caldy, and she somehow figured I would like the UUs and told me about the church. Really in the nick of time, because I had been at home with my kids for several years and was having trouble making friends, meeting people, and finding community. I immediately started coming on my own and immediately felt at home. I totally loved the first Christmas Eve service I attended, which was mostly pagan-based and was very illuminating. I'm not sure that the baby Jesus was even mentioned at that service. I didn't care about the small spaces like the minute nursery and the lack of green space and the horrifyingly inaccessible stairs. I felt warmly welcomed, and because I was searching for a spiritual home for myself and my family, finding this church was a huge win. We attended small group dinners, congregational visioning sessions, and I went to women's group and got involved in RE, and soon we were completely ensconced. Although we were not truly aware of the history of the place, we certainly could tell, as Scott mentioned yesterday, that it was well loved and had become a vital community to the core group, many of whom are still here. I got involved in the leadership, was asked to be on the board as a trustee soon after I joined, and became very deeply involved. This was all just as our minister, Richard Ruach, was about to retire, and we were launched on a new phase of long-range planning, visibility, and growth. The leadership, which included Jack Head and Sandra Bolte and many others who are still here, knew that if this little fellowship was to grow and gain more families, then we had to get a different space. I remember attending a discussion where Jack was encouraging the congregation to think about how what we had to offer to the larger community was so important and needed, and how thinking more broadly about our mission and vision was what we should be doing. I was quite pregnant with Liam. I was enormous. And he pointed at me and said, "You don't want your baby to have no green space to play in, do you?" And I was flummoxed, but had to agree. In any case, there was the will and energy to try to find another building. It did cause some anxiety because some folks loved the little white church so much, had put an extensive amount of sweat equity into it, and were reluctant to let it go. There was a lot of effort made to find different options for finding space in town, moving the building, etc. Finally, a donation was made to purchase this property, and the die was cast. I don't recall all the details, but suffice it to say there were many discussions and debates. This is one of the things I also really appreciated, aside from the lack of dogma and creed, the welcoming attitudes and the music. The respectful dialogue was so refreshing. I had only been to Catholic church as a churchgoer, and I don't recall any discussions with the congregation. Of course, Catholicism is a hierarchical and patriarchal religion, so things don't happen the way they do in a UU church with our congregational polity. I recall being in a board meeting and telling Jack that I needed to defer to our then interim minister, Robert Reed, about something. And Jack was like, "Pshaw, he's just the minister. You don't have to defer to him. We're the congregation. We're who matter." Wow, that was a revelation. Another awesome aspect of our new lives and participation in the church was that we learned that our new neighbors were Bill and Karen Lyon. Bill was one of the founders of this congregation, so that was super sweet. What a gift it was to get to know them well. I often tell people that UUCCI saved my life. I still think it's true. It gave us an outlet for our thoughts and beliefs. It also gave us a supportive place to do the social justice work, which we firmly believe in. Not only are my dearest friends here, I have met so many interesting people, had so many interesting and challenging conversations, and participated in so many wonderful events like this weekend's. It's here that I learned that folks with all different perspectives, spiritual paths, work experiences, and attitudes, family backgrounds, etc., can work together for a common goal and love each other. It's here that I learned to really love other people and their children for their diverse personalities and attitudes. And it's here that I learned that commitment to a mission and goal is of great value. It's here that I learned that from older women about how to overcome life's hardships, and from very good men and women about how to navigate a world that is often unjust and brutal. It affirmed many of our previously held values, the importance of respecting the dignity of all people and working to make the world a better place and the value of the greater good. It's here that I have had many opportunities in leadership and have learned more about my strengths and weaknesses. Although my personal experience is quite positive, I don't want to paint an unrealistic picture. All of us who've been around a while can acknowledge that there have been stressful times, perhaps growing pains, anxieties, and disagreements, but we have weathered those storms, and we are a stronger and more mature organization for it. COVID was, of course, particularly trying. Personally, having been in the leadership during some highly anxious time, I can say that I learned a great deal about myself and humans who care about a place as solidly as many of us do. Like many of you, our life here at UUCCI has been constant and full. Like many relationships of value, it takes patience, an ability to look beyond yourself, and a desire to move forward. Our commitment has been bigger than our own needs and desires, and I have learned that that is an important way to look at life in one's life and community. I'm sure that UCCI will continue to evolve and change, and not everyone here today will stay for the duration. I also feel that it could possibly save your life if you let it.
What I'm going to read is an essay that some of you may have read in a book of mine. It's an old essay. And I chose it because it has to do with falling in love with the earth. Any child who grows up in the country and has parents and other mentors who encourages him or her is going to fall in love with the earth. And I had the good fortune to have parents who thought that was a perfectly normal and healthy thing to do. My father and mother both. This particular essay focuses on my father, who was the first of my two parents to die, the first by 25 years. But I could have written a comparably intimate essay, and I have, about my mother. It's called Buckeye. When I came to this congregation to give the message in November, I read a story. And in the Wonderbox that time, I brought this wooden box. And that's features in this little essay. And so I brought it back again. And here's Buckeye. Years after my father's heart quit, I keep in a wooden box on my desk the two Buckeyes that were in his pocket when he died. Once the size of plums, the brown seeds are shriveled now, hollow, hard as pebbles, yet they still gleam from the polish of his hands. He used to reach for them in his overalls or suit pants and click them together, or he would draw them out, cupped in his palm, and twirl them with his blunt carpenter's fingers, all the while humming snatches of old tunes. "Do you really believe Buckeyes keep off arthritis?" I asked him more than once. He would flex his hands and say, "I do so far." My father never paid much heed to pain. Near the end, when his worn knee often slipped out of joint, he would pound it back in place with a rubber mallet. If a splinter worked into his flesh beyond the reach of tweezers, he would heat the blade of his knife over a cigarette lighter and slice through the skin. He sought to ward off arthritis, not because he feared pain, but because he lived through his hands, and he dreaded the swelling of knuckles, the stiffening of fingers. What use would he be if he could no longer hold a hammer or guide a plow? When he was a boy, he had known farmers, not yet 40 years old, whose hands had curled into claws, men so crippled they could not tie their own shoes, could not sign their names. I mean to tickle my grandchildren when they come along, he told me. And I mean to build doll houses and turn spindles for tiny chairs on my lathe. So he fondled those buckeyes as if they were charms, carrying them with him when our family moved from Ohio at the end of my childhood, bearing them to new homes in Louisiana, then Oklahoma, Ontario, and Mississippi, and carrying them in his pockets still on his final day when pain 1,000 times fiercer than arthritis gripped his heart. The box where I keep the buckeyes also comes from Ohio, made by my father from a walnut plank he bought at a farm auction. I remember the auction. Remember the sagging face of the widow whose home was being sold. Remember my father telling her he would prize that walnut as if he had watched the tree grow from a sapling on his own. He didn't care for pewter or silver or gold, but he cherished wood. On the rare occasions when my mother coaxed him into a museum, he ignored the paintings or porcelain and studied the exhibit cases, the banisters, the moldings, the parquet floors. I remember him planing that walnut board, sawing it, sanding it, joining piece to piece to make footstools, picture frames, jewelry boxes. My own box, a bit larger than a soap dish, lined with red corduroy, was meant to hold earrings and pins, not buckeyes. The top is inlaid with pieces fitted so as to bring out the grain, and 4 diagonal joints converging from the corners toward the center. And if I stare long enough at those converging lines, they float free of the box and point to a center deeper than wood. I learned to recognize buckeyes and beeches, sugar maples and shagbark hickories, wild cherries, walnuts, and dozens of other trees while tramping through the Ohio woods with my father. To his eyes, their shapes, their leaves, their bark, their winter buds were as distinctive as the set of a friend's shoulders. As with friends, he was partial to some, craving their company. So he would go out of his way to visit particular trees, walking in a circle around the splayed roots of a sycamore, laying his hand against the trunk of a white oak, ruffling the feathery green boughs of a cedar. Trees, breathe, he said. Listen. I listened and heard the breath of trees. When he introduced me to the buckeye, he broke off a chunk of the gray bark and held it up to my nose. I gagged. That's why the old timers called it stinking buckeye, he told me. They used it for cradles and feed troughs and peg legs. Why for peg legs? I asked. Because it's light and hard to split, so it won't shatter when you're clumping around. He showed me this tree in late summer when the fruits had fallen and the ground was littered with prickly brown pods. He picked up one as fat as a lemon and peeled away the husk to reveal the shiny seed. He laid it in my palm and closed my fist around it so the seed peeped out from the circle formed by my index finger and thumb. You see where it got its name? I saw. What gleamed in my hand was the eye of a deer, bright with life. It's beautiful, I said. It's beautiful, my father agreed, but it's also poisonous. Nobody eats buckeyes except maybe a fool squirrel. I knew the gaze of deer from living in a military arsenal up in the northeastern corner of Ohio. After supper, we often drove the arsenal's gravel roads past the munitions bunkers, past acres of rusting tanks and wrecked bombers, into the far fields where we counted deer. One June evening, while mist rose from the ponds, we counted over 100, our family record. We found the deer in herds, in bunches, in amorous pairs. We came upon lone bucks, their antlers lifted against the sky like the bare branches of dogwood. If you were quiet, if your hands were empty, if you moved slowly, you could leave the car and steal to within a few paces of a grazing deer, close enough to see the delicate lips, the twitching nostrils, the glossy, fathomless eyes. The wooden box on my desk holds these grazing deer, as it holds the buckeyes and the walnut plank and the farm auction and the munitions bunkers and the breathing forests and my father's hands. I could lose the box. I could lose the polished seeds. But if I were to lose the memories, I would become a bush without roots, and every new breeze would toss me about. All those memories lead back to the northeastern corner of Ohio, the place where I came to consciousness, where I learned to connect feelings with words, where I fell in love with the earth. It was a troubled love. For much of the land I knew as a child had been ravaged. The ponds in the arsenal teemed with bluegill and beaver, but they were also laced with TNT from the making of bombs. Because the wolves and coyotes had long since been killed, some of the deer, so plump in the June grass, collapsed in the January snow, whittled by hunger to racks of bones. Outside the arsenal's high barbed fences, many of the farms had failed, their barns caving in, their topsoil gone. Ravines were choked with swollen couches and junked washing machines and cars. Crossing fields, you had to be careful not to slice your feet on tin cans or shards of glass. Most of the rivers had been dammed, turning fertile valleys into scummy playgrounds for boats. One free-flowing river, the Mahoning, ran past the small farm near the arsenal where our family lived during my later years of growing up. We owned just enough land to pasture 3 ponies and to grow vegetables for our table. But those few acres opened onto miles of woods and creeks and secret meadows. I walked that land in every season, every weather, following animal trails. But then the Mahoning too was doomed. We were forced to sell our land, and a dam began to rise across the river. If enough people had spoken for the river, we might have saved it. If enough people had believed that our scarred country was worth defending, we might have dug in our heels and fought. Our attachments to the land were all private. We had no shared love, no literature, no lore, no art to root us there, to give us courage, to help us stand our ground. The only maps we had were those issued by the state, showing a maze of numbered lines stretched across emptiness. The Ohio landscape never showed up on postcards or posters, never unfurled like tapestry in films, rarely filled even a paragraph of books. There were no mountains in that place, no waterfalls, no rocky gorges, no vistas. It was a country of low hills, cut over woods, scoured fields, villages that had lost their purpose, roads that had lost their way. In my corner of Ohio, the gullies were choked with trash, yet cedars flickered up like green flames from the cracks in stone. In the evening, bombs exploded at the ammunition dump, yet from the darkness came the mating cries of owls. I was saved from despair by knowing a few men and women who cared enough about the land to clean up trash, who planted walnuts and oaks that would long outlive them, who imagined a world that would have no call for bombs. How could our hearts be large enough for heaven if they are not large enough for earth? The only country I am certain of is the one here below. The only paradise I know is the one lit by our everyday sun, this land of difficult love, shot through with shadow. The place where we learn this love, if we learn it at all, shimmers behind every new place we inhabit. A family move carried me away from Ohio 30 years ago. My schooling and marriage and job have kept me away ever since, except for visits in memory and flesh. I returned to the site of our farm one cold November day when the trees were skeletons and the ground shone with the yellow of fallen leaves. From a previous trip, I knew that our house had been bulldozed. Our yard and pasture had grown up in thickets, and the reservoir had flooded the woods. On my earlier visit, I had merely gazed from the car, too numb with loss to climb out. But on this November day, I parked the car, drew on my hat and gloves, opened the door, and walked. I was looking for some sign that we had lived here, some token of our affection for this place. All that I recognized, aside from the contours of the land, were two weeping willows that my father and I had planted near the road. They had been slips the length of my forearm when we set them out, and now their crowns rose higher than the telephone poles. When I touched them last, their trunks had been smooth and supple, as thin as my wrist, and now they were furrowed and stout. I took off my gloves and laid my hands against the rough bark. Immediately, I felt the wince of tears. Without knowing why, I said hello to my father, quietly at first, then louder and louder, as if only shouts could reach him through the bark and miles and years. Surprised by sobs, I turned from the willows and stumbled away toward the drowned woods, calling to my father. I sensed that he was nearby. Even as I called, I was wary of grief's deceptions. I had never seen his body after he died. By the time I reached the place of his death, a furnace had reduced him to ashes. The need to see him, to let go of him, to let go of this land and time was powerful enough to summon mirages. I knew that. But I also knew, stumbling through the woods, that my father was here. At the bottom of a slope where the creek used to run, I came to an expanse of gray stumps and withered grass. It was a bay of the reservoir from which the water had retreated, the level drawn down by engineers or drought. I stood at the edge of this desolate ground, willing it back to life, trying to recall the woods where my father had taught me the names of trees. No green shoots rose. I walked out among the stumps. The grass crackled under my boots. Breath rasped in my throat, but otherwise the world was silent. Then a cry broke overhead, and I looked up to see a red-tailed hawk launching out from the top of an oak. I recognized the bird from its band of dark feathers across the creamy breast and the tail splayed like rosy fingers against the sun. It was a red-tailed hawk, for sure. And it was also my father. Not a symbol of my father, not a reminder, not a ghost, but the man himself, right there, circling in the air above me, a bird. I knew this as clearly as I knew the sun burned in the sky. A calm poured through me. My chest quit heaving. My eyes dried. Hawk and father wheeled above me, circle upon circle, wings barely moving, head still. My own head was still, looking up, knowing and being known. Time scattered like fog. At length, father and hawk stroked the air with powerful wings, 3 beats, then vanished over a ridge. The voice of my education told me then and tells me now that I did not meet my father, that I merely projected my longing onto a bird. My education may well be right. Yet nothing I heard in school, nothing I've read, no lesson reached by logic, has ever convinced me as utterly or stirred me as deeply as did that red-tailed hawk. Nothing in my education prepared me to love a piece of earth, least of all a humble, battered country like northeastern Ohio. I learned that from the land itself. Before leaving the drowned woods, I looked around at the ashen stumps, the wilted grass, and for the first time since moving from this place, I was able to let it go. This ground was lost. The flood would reclaim it. But other ground could be saved, must be saved, in every watershed, every neighborhood. For each home ground, we need new maps, living maps, stories and poems, photographs and paintings, essays and songs. We need to know where we are so that we may dwell in our place with a full heart. That's it. Thank you.